Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister for just over 100 days. In that time, he's had to sack a tax-avoiding former Chancellor, and his Deputy Prime Minister has been mired in apparently endless claims of bullying. Also, the economy has gone to shit. But how is he faring in the polls? Not very well. Now, given that introduction, you might not be surprised, but these are really bad for the guy. So net approval of prime ministers on or near 100 days into the job. So Tony Blair was plus 50, it was massive. Gordon Brown plus 26, David Cameron plus 27, Theresa May plus 19, Boris Johnson minus 3, Rishi Sunak minus 18. So people really do not like Rishi Sunak 100 days into the job.
I have seen some Tories make the argument, which is, well, look, you're saying how his first 100 days gone. It's important to say, Michael, where's Liz Truss on that list? Well, she's not on the list because she didn't last 100 days. And by that measure, they say, well, look, he's doing quite well because he did enter power, which is, we have to be fair here, he did enter power in an extraordinary moment. The markets have calmed a bit. We're not seeing, manic, frenzied betting against the pound with regards to the dollar. Yes, interest rates have gone up, but that's because of the Bank of England. I think realistically, interest rates won't stay as high as they are now through to the next general election. Of course, things can change, but realistically, inflation is now beginning to fall. They'll probably be reducing interest rates at some point this year, even, let alone 2024. So I suppose there's lots of levels to this. First of all, it doesn't tell us very much. The first 100 days. What I found probably more interesting, Michael, but I think it's important to look at this alongside the poor poll ratings for Sunak, were the commitments that he made, which was, I have these 5 promises I'm making to the British people. And for people watching, I think the instinctive response is, well, hold on. Normally, when you come into the job, you make the promises and you say, judge me on the first 100 days. He's been there 100 days and he's now making the promises, right? So cut inflation, stop people coming over the English Channel, things like this, cut GP, weights and so on and so forth. You have the Bank of England increasing interest rates. I think a day earlier, you had the IMF, and it's just a projection, but it is still a projection, projecting that Russia's economy would grow more than the UK's in 2023. This is a country facing arguably the most stringent set of economic sanctions in the history of humanity. It's certainly up there. And they're growing more than us, right? That's quite significant. So I think there's so much going on here, Michael. It's difficult to get a firm read on it. Sunak's job was to come in, and I think by the end of this year, just be on 30, low 30s, right? Which is still a 1997 style majority for Labour. And I think, and this is probably accurate, the Tories believe that in the final month, 6 weeks of campaigning, they'll close that gap. I'm sure they will, right? They have the best people in the world at this. Vincent Crosby and his little minions, they throw money at this. They will be far better than Labour when it comes to paid social advertising. They'll be far better than Labour when it comes to using, latest data analytic tools and so on and so forth. And of course, Labour won't have the get out the vote advantage, some might call it, of 2017, certainly. So it's going to be an interesting one. I think right now, if you had to be a betting person, you'd say it would be a significant Labour majority of 30 plus. Where I think Sunak is falling short is that he's not even getting to that like 30, low 30s, which should be the benchmark for the Tories in 2023. You still see many, many polls. I think I saw a poll maybe yesterday with the Tories on like low 20s, right? They're still on trust level polling. And surely it makes you wonder, that must be posing questions to Conservatives. They must be scratching their heads thinking, look, we didn't expect to be ahead of Labour. We had an awful autumn in 2022. The objective economic conditions are very bad. But Sunak is slick. He did deliver the furlough scheme. He looks authoritative. He's not being accused of criminality like half the rest of the party. And yet he's broadly polling with the party the same as Truss. I think that's a really, really surprising statistic. I don't think many people expected that. I think they expected Labour leads of 10, 15, but not 25 points.
5 pledges. They are halving inflation, having the economy growing, debt falling, waiting lists falling, and small boats being stopped. That was announced on the 4th of January, so it's been around for a while, but they are fairly forgettable. I want to show you one more poll. This one's potentially more surprising than the last one we showed you. It's asking people what party they associate with these statements. So standing with British workers, Labour on 50%, Tories on 13%, spending for the NHS, Labour miles ahead, as you'd imagine. The more surprising one, lower taxes. So 40% of people associate Labour with lower taxes, compared to 17% of people who associate the Tories with lower taxes. When it comes to higher spending, they're basically neck and neck. We can go to some more and see the only ones which the Tories are winning on, or more strongly associated with, is immigration. So tough on immigration, Labour on 14%, the Tories on 36%, which I presume is why they like to talk about the small boats whenever they can, even though they've been in power for 13 years. Aaron, does anything stand out to you there? I mean, Labour being the party of low taxes. I mean, Labour haven't said they will tax people less than the Tories, but I suppose they haven't said anything about taxes, really. What do you make of that?
It's both obviously stupid, but it's also reasonable in so much as people are paying more in the average person, not you're ultra rich. People are paying more in taxes now than they felt they were before 2010. Then, of course, you've got the additional thing of higher interest rates. I know interest rates were, in 2010, interest rates were also very, very low. So I think people look at their mortgages, they look at their taxes, national insurance and whatnot. And that was a palaver as well, Michael. So I think people generally get the sense their national insurance is higher than it actually is, because for the whole of 2022, the Tories were saying we're going to increase your national insurance. And then they didn't for most people earning less than about £58,000 a year. So I understand why somebody would say it, but I think it's quite clear to me that Labour aren't going to reduce taxes for most people. I mean, A, they've not really said they're going to do that. B, I mean, they can't. The problems that we're facing now, chronically low investment, aging population, need to transition with regards to climate change, declining, high streets, public services falling apart. Clearly, we're going to fund them. The vast majority of that has to fall on the backs of the wealthy, but clearly we're not going to move to a low tax society overnight, nor should we. I would plausibly see a world where Labour cut VAT by 5-10% for 6 months, and maybe cut national insurance for middle and low income earners, which I think is a very wise thing to do. You can, of course, only do that if you really go after the super rich, which they're not really talking about. The one that sticks out is migration. And so clearly, I think the Tories are going to try and fight a general election on migration. And as an ancillary point to that, proposing that a Labour government would basically undermine Brexit. And of course, Stum has done his best. I think he's been right on this to say, well, we won't rejoin the EU. He said that, repeatedly, much to the chagrin of the people that were most supportive of him for Labour leader in early 2020. I think he's right to do that. But they're now moving on to a new terrain. You see this with people like Nigel Farage. They say, well, we won't rejoin the European Union, but we'll still be under the ECHR. We'll still be subject to lawyers from overseas. We won't have a sovereign immigration policy. We'll still be bound by laws not made in the UK. It'll be Brino, Brexit in name only. So I think on Brexit and I think on immigration, they'll try and save as many seats as they can. And I can see a world where that works, right? Because look, put yourself in this situation. This is the worst case scenario for Labour. We have a general election. I think the latest we can have a general election, Michael, is January 2025. Let's say we have a general election in December 2024. I think that's wise because it's colder, you've got shorter days, so on the ground canvassing is less effective, as we found out in 2019. That helps the Tories. It also gives them more time. So inflation should have come down, interest rates should be lower, we should have come out of recession. This is their thinking. And at that point, they can say, look, since 2019, we've delivered Brexit, we got out of the pandemic, and we've got on top of inflation, and we're growing again. And to at least 30% of the public, the voting public, that will be adequate. The question is, how far can you take that? If they can get above 35, 36%, then you're looking plausibly at a hung parliament. There are, of course, we've not talked about this, boundary changes. That is the best case scenario, I think, for the Tories. And that's a lot of ifs, buts, and maybes. But you can see how that plays out. But right now, they're facing Armageddon.